community. They've called this type of research archaeoporn. They have corrupted numerous findings, and the way that they have presented archaeology is not in the way that they do traditional archaeological finds. They've also brought in DNA evidence, supposedly. The problem with that is we have no DNA evidence to start with. Where is Jesus of Nazareth's DNA evidence? So they're just making wild connections. They're saying part of the proof that they're using that this ossuary named Mariamne Imara had to be the wife of this Jesus, son of Joseph. And keep in mind, you have to start with assumptions that he had to be married, which no historical evidence validates that. And in fact, Matthew 19 validates Jesus not being married, since he claimed that the primary role of serving, the best role to serve God, that you're going to dedicate more time to him, would be to remain single, as the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians 7. Why would he advocate that, coming with the primary purpose, more than him, nobody else, to serving God, and he would then be married? Not that marriage is wrong, because it was ordained of God. But in order to give more time to God, the primary way to serve, Jesus claimed in Matthew 19 and Paul in 1 Corinthians 7, was to remain single. So he would then contradict his own statement of himself.
That's good.
So you put these pieces together and you get the picture that they're trying to connect dots where there's no connections made. They're claiming to have taken DNA, mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is just the part of the DNA that could be discovered in a time period, and it won't decay, and you can discover it if two individuals had the same mother. Since this ossuary named Mariamne Imara didn't have the same mitochondrial DNA as the Jesus, son of Joseph, DNA, oops, they must have been husband and wife, because you don't normally discover a person in a family burial that is not related by mother.
Wow.
That's an assumption they made. What they should have asked was, number one is, she could have been his half-sister. She could have been his aunt by father's side. She also could have been a cousin by the father's side. She could have been an exceptional servant, and in those days they were buried with the family. How about taking DNA from the rest of the other ossuaries?
That makes
You
sense.
see where this is going? This is slanting the evidence totally and not asking the questions that should have been asked. Anybody knows that if you do that kind of a research, you're always going to get what you're looking for, because you're slanting the evidence. And they didn't do any research on the other one. Besides, when you talk about DNA, and that's why the public has paid special attention to this, and if you go to the web, there's a lot of information and people that have bought into the falsehood. Because when you speak of DNA, archaeology, science, people automatically take an ear. But in fact, they are slanting the evidence, and they're not really telling you the whole story. They should have done investigation of the other ossuaries to begin with. So you see where they're connecting a lot of dots that just don't connect. You have to begin with the assumption that Jesus was married. No evidence. You have to then begin with the assumption that just because they don't have the same mother, they must have been married. What about the other Matthew? What about Josie? Another one that was in there. Which, by the way, they're claiming that Josie is a unique spelling, and that appears in Mark 6:3 as one of the brothers of Jesus. But they failed to tell you that we have a number of discovery of bone boxes with the name of Josie.
Wow.
It was a very common name. Out of all this, the most disturbing part, which is going back to your original question, Beverly, is that they're claiming Jesus rose spiritually. Now, there's a number of theologians that do agree with that. The problem with the premise that Jesus rose spiritually is huge. First of all, the Old Testament does not understand resurrection as spiritual. When we talk about resurrection in the Old Testament, it is always physical. Physical. It is never spiritual. The idea of spiritual resurrection, or a spirit as opposed to the body, comes from the Greek mythology of the Homer of Iliad. It comes from then down the line in 400 BC from Aristotle and Socrates and the Greeks that thought the body was the lower, decaying, the the material, the things that were not good, as opposed to the spirit, which was the true essence of the person. Hence, this idea took a life of its own and was very prevalent in all Macedonia, where Paul went through and traveled. But not in the Hebrew Scriptures. The Hebrew Scriptures, when Adam and Eve sinned, if you look at Genesis 3, they were banned, and they were banned from the tree of life that would keep them from living physically in sin forever. Thus, it is very important to understand that to overthrow the curse of the original sin, it is physical. Hence, the Jews understood resurrection to be physical. Not only that, when you get to the first century, and you study all the documents in the leading up to when Jesus, came and dwelt among us. All the information, all of it, is pointing to physical resurrection. Judaism understood resurrection physically. The church fathers that followed and wrote after the apostles left the scene, all of them talk about physical resurrection. The Mishnah, all the rabbinic writings, physical resurrection. Not only that, here's a key. Some of the four Gospels include some things and exclude some other things. Here's one thing that all four include that is no small thing. The stone, the rock, was removed.
Wow.
Now, if Jesus rose spiritually, why would you need a rock removed?
That's true. That's good.
Certainly, God could transport people from one location to another, like Star Trek.
Yeah. Yes.
But he wanted to convey to the readers there and those of us that would today read the Scriptures that Jesus' body that went in came out glorified, but nevertheless it was that same body that went in.
Yes, well, he even asked in the Bible, he asked Doubting Thomas after he had risen.
Absolutely.
He said to touch me because he didn't believe it.
Of course. Of course. Now, they're going to argue that, and I've already in my book, I cover in the Appendix B, I already answered their response to our response. And they're claiming since the angels materialized and ate in Genesis 18, Jesus was a spirit and materialized. The problem with that is the angels originally from their nature are spirit beings. According to Hebrews 2. Psalms, it says that they're spirits in Hebrews 1. But Jesus, once he took on a secondary nature as being God, the God-man, he owns his allegiance to the man, the humanity side. So though he can venture into the spirit realm and back into the human realm, when he rose from the dead, he rose owing the allegiance to the human side.
Wow,
that's an important detail that
awesome.
they have not considered.
Take me on a walk, on a journey here.
Yes.
You're talking about and we know that Easter is coming up soon, so this is really on time.
Absolutely. Here
in this book, The Jesus Family Tomb Examined, Did Jesus Rise Physically? Take me on a walk from when he did rise.
Yes.
When Mary Magdalene met him.
There is more